then we will have Frank speak. So everybody, welcome Rick.
Thank you, Gary.
And also for not blinking an eye when we asked for donations, and the rod and reels came out, and really appreciate that.
I'll use this guy. Well, thank you for having me, and yeah, I really appreciate it. And in terms of always being there for the club, I've been lucky enough to get to work at Fisherman's Landing, which seems crazy. I've been there for a little over 25 years, and the club has been part of that for longer than I've been working there. So it's a pleasure and an honor to get to do it, and we're happy to do so. One thing too, the San Diego Rod and Reel Club has always had a 10% discount for everything in the tackle store outside of licenses and labor, and it's something that we're really proud of and we want to continue to do for the club. So I hope that you guys utilize it, because the club means a lot to us, and you guys have been there to support us, and we want to do the same for you. So anyways, thanks for having me, and we're excited to get to be here. So if there's questions that are beyond today, please do it. Come into the store, and we'd love to help get you dialed in. It doesn't have to be you outfitting a big boat full of fishing tackle. If you want to drop by a tackle store and get some great info from one of the kids who works behind the counter, it's what we're here for. So when it comes to fishing a big fish tournament like this, I think the best tip, advice, whatever I could say is, don't treat it like your normal day of going out in the skiff and catching some fish. If your goal is to do well or win this tournament, you're not worried about a day of having a bunch of bites and catching a bunch of fish. A tournament format like this is 1 or 2 big fish, and your entire day and mindset should be around that side of it. The inshore categories on this tournament are, all the bass species, halibut, bonita, barracuda, all of those things. Probably my favorite way, and I would guess probably most of you guys' favorite way to catch all those fish, is with a bass rod and a plastic or a surface iron or some sort of fun way to go out and get a bunch of bites. And that's the best way to do it 364 other days of the year, but not necessarily the best way to gain yourself one big bite. And that's what it takes to win the tournament. So my first thought would just be to have the mindset of exactly that. You're there to get one big calico bass or one big halibut, not a day full of them. And I think that the one thing that all of those fish have in common would be a live bait and a tank full of greenback mackerel. And I think that is not the way that 90% of us would probably treat a day of calico bass fishing or sand bass fishing or any of the two. But if your goal is to win this tournament, that's going to likely provide you the biggest bite and your best opportunity at a big fish. Please.
So your thought is big bait, big fish.
Totally, yeah. That doesn't mean that you haven't caught a big one in your life fishing a 4-inch swim bait and a lead head. My biggest calico bass of my life was on a lead head and a 5-inch plastic. But it's all about percentages, and if you put everything together, you for sure, if you were at the Coronado Islands all day and you had a tank of greenies and you were fly lining those things into the wash rocks, every bite you have is going to be from a big one. If you're fishing a 4-inch swim bait, you might get 50 bites for the day, and maybe one of those is a big one, but every bite you get fishing a big bait is going to be of a bigger fish. That doesn't mean it's going to win, but you're trying to play the odds and play the percentages. Part of this tournament, as we talked about when the rules were read, was that the start time is at 12:01. That's 7 hours of darkness to fish, low light conditions, often being an optimal time for a bite like that. This isn't the one fun day of fishing. This is your tournament day that you invested some money in, and you and your buds are going to win this thing. I would treat it as such. I would be fishing in the dark. I'd be jigging my mackerel in the dark. I'd be traveling to where I wanted to be first thing. You can call it an early afternoon, but don't give up what could likely be your best time, wanting to launch with a little bit extra daylight, navigating in the dark can be a little bit tougher, but I think it could be really important. If that's something that concerns you, give yourself an extra half hour on the front side so you can go in a little bit slower. Not that this is all just about live bait fishing, but that does bring up another great thing. I know many of us fish out of small boats in here, and as we go forward, faster and faster skiffs are becoming a thing. Man, your live bait is one of the most important things you have. And I see so often bait maybe get loaded a little bit extra heavy, and as soon as the bait is put on the boat, throttle down and racing to the zone that we're planning on fishing, whether it be inshore or offshore. And what often happens is somebody runs for an hour and they get to wherever the X on their chart plotter is, and then they pull the boat out of gear, and then they rig up all their rods, and then they start fishing. I'm always a fan of doing that in the opposite order, man. Get your bait, get yourself situated, let your bait settle in the tank. You know, as soon as that bait goes in and it's racing around and it's unhappy, go slow, pack a little ice, maybe put your wash down hose in the tank, introduce a little bit more oxygen while that bait is freaked out. Like, your bait is going to carry you through that day, and I think treating it as the gold that it is will garnish you a little bit extra. In terms of, please.
I know that definitely applies to fin bait. What about if you were having a live hang squid?
I think that would be one of the best calls a guy could make. I think it's doing some extra work on your part. This is a time of year where there is a lot of squid around. It's not 2014. You know, there's not giant squid nests that 50 boats are on that you can super find easy, but boy, there absolutely is squid around. A lot of that big yellowtail at the Cornwall Islands is coughing up squid. There's small squid areas up and down the coast from, you know, La Jolla to North County, and it's going to require work on your end to do it, but I think it's a tremendous way to spend your time. Again, these tournament rules provide you the opportunity of fishing in the dark starting at midnight. You could easily jig up enough bait to fish with, and whether you choose to then sit on that bait and try and catch a big yellowtail with it, or then transport that bait to a kelp line to try and fish a sea bass, or in the lee of the islands to try and catch a big halibut, I think it would be a tremendous thing. A lot of work on your part, but you know, live bait, squid doesn't have to be live that day too. Like, if you're to try and, you know, we've got 2 weeks before the tournament starts, put 2 or 3 nights worth of fishing in, jig up some squid, take extra good care of it, you know, not washed out and fish fresh yet. I think it would be a great leg up to have. But again, I don't want to make it sound like you can only catch them that way, but I think it's something that provides a lot of good opportunity to something. And the biggest part is exactly that, having that mindset that today we're not trying to catch 50 calico bass, we're trying to catch one that's bigger than everybody else's. And whether that be fishing on the coast or fishing down in Mexico, I think targeting that fish is a big part of it. The distance at which we often troll back has increased so much, but it's also given bites and jig strikes on bluefin that we used to not get. You know, that Mad Mac craze kind of started things, and you know, I don't know if that lure gets bit so well or got bit so well in the year that it became popular because of the lure itself, or just the style at which that it was fished. When you know, bluefin is traditionally a fish that doesn't jig strike well and doesn't usually bite jigs that are very close to the boat. All of those bites, whether they be from the kite, have that one thing in common, is that it's fished far away from the boat, outside of the prop wash, and that's certainly the most effective on all of those bluefin trolling techniques, whether you're fishing a spreader bar or a Mad Mac or some sort of an aerial lure. It's clear of prop wash. You know, it's a lot of work on the boat driver's side of things. Identifying where the fish are at is obviously always the most important thing. You know, finding your visual cue, whether it be birds picking or a flat spot or, you know, disturbed water from fish, but then knowing how to present your lure, whether it be with a kite or troll behind the boat, to that fish without driving right through the middle of it. All of those kite techniques typically involve some sort of wind, and knowing how to put the wind at your beam so that the wind is blowing your kite outboard of your prop wash, but then you finding a tack that drives you the direction to where that fish is at. And that's like how the interception of that big fish goes, is, you know, fish is here, the wind is blowing this way, so we need to be driving our boat like this so that the kite is pushed out to the side, and as we skirt where the edge of that fish was, our flying fish is presented right through the middle of that. You know, that big fish doesn't bite from you driving right over the top of it. It bites with you staying way off of it, but then pulling the baits through it. in terms of the rest of the offshore category, Dorado and Yellowtail, I don't think that there's much a guy can do. Again, I think it goes back to the same thing as before. If you had a half a tank full of greenies and were able to fish that, I think that's going to likely produce your biggest Yellowtail or potential of Dorado. So for the offshore side of things, I couldn't be more of a proponent of having the live bait thing. When it comes to jigging squid, like a gentleman had mentioned before, there has been a fair little bit of that around right now, and it's something that does require a little bit more work than just going, and it's something that is often held a little bit closer to the vest, but it often shows up in similar areas every year. So if you've had success with squid fishing or you've caught sea bass in the past and you have all those numbers, men spend a little bit of time mowing the lawn and driving back and forth and looking at your meters. Squid shows up a little bit differently on everybody's machine. We have a Simrad unit on ours, and squid on our machine often looks like a little bit of fuzz on the bottom, and if you took like a mechanical number 2 pencil and made some vertical scratches above it, that's what small amounts of squid look like on our machine. And my boat partner and I will spend a tremendous amount of time during slow periods when that bait should be around, times like now, to find a little batch of it. And it's something that can surely give you a leg up. You don't have to have a full big nighttime float to have enough to fish with. If you're not familiar, these little snagger ganyons are how we make a high percentage of our bait now, especially in the daylight hours, with either a 4-ounce torpedo sinker at the bottom that you just kind of cast this out, drag it across the bottom, slowly jig it through, and you can snag up 12 or 15 pieces from a small amount of squid area. If you had some squid eggs on an anchor job, things like that. I think that a fair bit of looking can make a big difference in terms of the live bait thing. If we are going to go the artificial route, in terms of our inshore species, I'm still a big fan of what we talked about before, the big bait, big fish scenario. Let's not spend our day trying to get a bite on trying to get one bite. Like if you fish a 4-inch bait, spend more time, fish lower, fish slower with a larger bait. Fish a 6-inch bait or a 7-inch bait. A lot of those bigger fish are not up winding really fast, competing with the 14-inchers. Hard bottom, structure spots, things like that. Spend more time trying to angle up your 1 or 2 bites as opposed to trying to fill the tank full of fish. With sea bass, I think that a tremendous amount of this fish could be caught close to home. One of the areas that I think gets overlooked the most in San Diego, speaking of San Diego Rod and Reel Club, is the area outside of Imperial Beach. Today, there is big yellowtail that was caught on the Imperial Beach. The Dolphin, the half-day boat out of Fisherman's Landing, had a very nice yellowtail. Most of the yellow that gets caught in there is of larger size than the school-sized fish. There's tremendous sand bass fishing for our boats the last couple of days. It's an excellent spot to catch a big halibut. And in addition to all the live bait techniques, there's some great fishing with trolled plugs, Rapalas, DTX minnows, things like that. One of the only downsides to fishing in that area is that there's a lot of wash from the kelp and a lot of eelgrass that you have to deal with if you are. So being proactive on your end of making sure your jigs are clear and jigs are clean makes a big difference. But there's opportunities very close to home at potentially picking off a fish that's bigger than the average grade that's at the Coronado Island. Things like that exist all the way up that goes through the Oceanside guys, and lots of guys from the Oceanside Club. The whole stretch of Camp Pendleton gets fished by so few people, and there's some fantastic kelp lines that are great for that. Maybe not for a 100-fish day, but excellent for picking off a big local home guard yellow, one big halibut, things like that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I could lend is that we want to treat this day as your one big fish opportunity, not a day for filling the sack. I'll leave it with that, but again, I'd be more than happy to go on any further at length if there's any questions that arise.
Thank you, Ricky.
Will you be fishing tournament?
I have to work. I'm working that weekend, so no go for me, man. But come on into the shop, and I'll tell you everywhere that I would fish if I was.